Good evening.
And we're here to talk about Stephen's recently published book. It's called Record, Play, Pause, Confessions of a Post-Punk Percussionist.
That's right.
And most importantly, well, not most importantly, Part 1.
That's right. Volume 1, yes.
And it covers a period from Stephen's childhood to the first ramblings and rumblings of New Order.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And it'd be good to start somewhere at the beginning. You grew up in a town called Macclesfield.
Yep. Still called Macclesfield.
Still called Macclesfield.
Yeah, we tried changing the name, tried changing many things about it, but it stays the same.
I don't know if many people here know much about Macclesfield, so maybe you could talk a little about what it was like growing up there in the 60s.
Macclesfield's it's a small town, a very small town. It was best described to me, somebody summed it up best. It was the trouble with Macclesfield is it's not on the way to anywhere. You have to want to go to Macclesfield, that you couldn't pass through it. And it felt at the time when I grew up that nothing really happened there at all. Where I lived was a very pleasant place. It was surrounded by fields, and if you went a bit further through the fields, there was a giant radio telescope called Jodrell Bank, which I found fascinating. Apart from that, the only place to go if you wanted any entertainment was Manchester. So everybody who ever lived in Macclesfield had a burning desire to escape, to get away from it, and various people have tried, but most of them come back for some reason. I can think of there's one person I know who's in the book who actually succeeded, and he went to Russia, and he's in Thailand, and he's having a great time. But most people leave Macclesfield only to return like boomerangs. I've never left, although I go around the world playing in bands. But it was the one thing I really, really wanted was to get out of the place as soon as possible by any means.
And what was the atmosphere like? Was there much music around?
My family. My father loved jazz music. His brother played clarinet and saxophone, and he was in bands. And my father organised dances, and it was through him that I developed a hatred of jazz. I've got rid of it now, but what he would do is, for reasons that were never ever successfully explained to me, our family had peculiar sleeping arrangements, in that I slept with my father and my mother had a room to herself, which it wasn't funny. I didn't laugh. Imagine being at school and you sleep with your dad. What's wrong with you? But what happened was my father got up very early to go to work, and because I shared the room with him, I had to share his taste in music. And what he would do is he would get up at 6 a.m. and he'd put on something by Bessie Smith or something by Duke Ellington, and I just wanted to sleep. I didn't want to hear Billie Holiday. Strange Fruit is a great track, but not at that time of day. Really. And so I disliked my father's music, and as young people do, I decided that I would, if I was going to like any kind of music, it wasn't going to be jazz.
And what was it at first? What was the first music that kind of you connected
The
to?
first music, apart from I hung out with my cousins, and my cousins like the Beatles and the Stones and all of that. But I wasn't too keen on all that either, because they were just singing about love, and and it was a bit, when you're a little teenager growing up, it's a bit, I wanted songs about rockets and battleships and sensible things. I wasn't, not girls. I kind of I found my meter sort of, I suppose, with some aspects of progressive rock, the ones that were specifically about spaceships. Hawkwind was kind of a big, that was my first exposure to live music. And coincidentally, it was also my mother and father's last exposure to live music. I persuaded them as part of the bargain that I would go to see, it was Count Basie. I would go and see one of my father's band, if only I could go and see a rock band. And the band in question was Hawkwind, and it was 1972. And I took my mother and father, and they were dressed up like they were going to a ball to see a band of, how would you describe them? Psychedelic freaks playing very loud music, very, very loud music with strobe lights and the whole shebang. It was only really because they had a topless go-go dancer called Stacia. It was only when she took to the stage that my parents just went whoosh, straight out, and I suddenly I realised that music had a power to shock people, and I was just sort of washed away with the volume and the whole thing. I thought was amazing, and it was kind of then that I realised that this was something that I could possibly have fun doing.
And what kind of fun did you think you could have with it?
I thought you could have also. It was whatever it was. It wasn't going to be fun like my mum and dad had. It wasn't going to be gin and tonic, and it wasn't going to be steak and kidney pudding. It was going to be. It was going to be. It's the revolution. We believed. I read lots of hippie books, even though I was kind of a bit young to be a hippie, and I never actually grew my hair that long. I had aspirations. But
how old were you when you saw that first gig?
I think I was 13,
okay,
possibly. Far too young to know about that sort of stuff. But I was very naughty with it.
Because you read a lot, didn't you, around that time? You were quite precocious in a way.
Yeah, I read an awful lot of books. I was fascinated by the underground culture, by the Trials of Oz. I really enjoyed that book, that whole period of time, and because the thing about the Trials of Oz was it was around school kids, and I felt it was kind of it was my duty to read about sort of that stuff.
And science fiction as well. You read a lot of stuff.
I read anything to do with science fiction. I read Ballard, a lot of Michael Moorcock, all sorts of stuff. I did. I was very, very taken with it because I thought that this was what people were writing about was what was going to happen.
A lot of it has happened.
A lot of it has happened, yeah, but not quite the way I expected.
Or hoped.
Or hope. The time machine. Now there's a good idea, isn't it? If only we could make one, our problems would be solved.
So what was your first? I mean, So Hawkwind and people like that inspired you to want to play?
Yeah, it was. Well, not play. They just make a racket. It was. I was convinced that that you didn't need any particular kind of musical knowledge to do that. I thought I knew better than that. I thought you could just, and let's start a band. Why? What could be so difficult about starting a band? So, like you do at school, I suggested this idea to some mates, and that was when I realised that there's hierarchy of rock and roll bands, which at that time revolved around the guitarist, because it was Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. It was a time of great guitar players, and despite the fact that we only had one guitar, there were 5 people who wanted to play it, and I was the worst guitar player. And the rules of rock and roll are that the worst guitar player becomes the drummer. And I just went along with that rule, and went back to my parents and said, I've decided I want to play a musical instrument. It's the drums. To which my father famously replied, drummers, Stephen, I've never met a sane one yet. They all go mad, end up taking morphine and drinking absinthe. I thought that didn't sound too bad, the absinthe. So I said, can you guarantee that's what's going to happen? But, he let me off the Hawkwind thing, and I was allowed to play the drums. If you ever have children, I'd probably try and. Drumming's great. It's really good. It's really good fun. It keeps you fit. It keeps your head clear. But it really annoys the neighbours. So unless you live far away from people, don't let your kids play the drums. You can get electronic kits now, but what's the point? They don't annoy anybody.
So you got a drum kit pretty early on.
Yeah. I mean, I unknown to me, writing the book, I realised that I had always had an interest in hitting things. My first. As a very small child in the school band, I fancied the tambourine as an instrument, but they wouldn't let me play it in case I broke it. So I was given the triangle, which I could do that, I could hit a triangle, and I enjoyed doing that. And then I got a sooty xylophone. You don't know who Sooty is, so Sooty's a small bear, a glove puppet who never speaks, but he communicates to the world through the medium of hitting things. And his instrument of choice was initially the xylophone, so I got a Sooty xylophone and destroyed that. And then I got a Sooty drum kit and destroyed that. And it was only writing the book that I realised that I had got this psychological attraction to drums.
And what kind of music? So you were in a band, and
it wasn't really band, because then once you get people, no one wants to be the other rule of rock and roll is that nobody wants to be the singer, and singers are funny things, very funny. Yeah. I realised that early on that you've got to be kind of special to be a singer, and nobody wanted to do it, so the band kind of just had a couple of rehearsals and fell apart.
But you carried on drumming.
But I carried on drumming, yeah.
Hoping to find
a band that would put up me. I mean, I one of the things about the drums is that the parents insisted that I had lessons, because that's what you do to try and put people off. They knew that I hated education, and by saying you've got to have lessons, they thought that would be it. I'd just give up. But I enjoyed the experience of hitting things so much.
Just about your education, I mean, I was surprised you didn't like school very much.
No.
But you were well read.
Yeah.
And was that recognised at school by any of your teachers? I mean, you obviously had a mind going on in there.
Yeah, it kind of didn't. It didn't really fit with what they wanted me to read. I mean, the thing that I was really good at was the Greek myths and Latin and the stuff, because I thought they were fantastic stories. But the fact that I'd heard of William Burroughs just didn't mean anything. No, it didn't. No, and I didn't want to stay there. Yeah. I didn't like education at all. I thought it was too. I thought I knew everything.
And you had a few incidents at school with cough liquid, cough mixture.
Yes, this is the first of the many sins that I had. Was after reading about the underground and seeing Hawkwind and reading the music papers, I got the idea, however ill-conceived it might be, that to be a successful musician you need to consume a lot of drugs. And I set about doing that by taking cough medicine, which wasn't really very good, and then I just got onto harder things like dry cleaning fluid, and then onto proper drugs like smoking pot and stuff like that. And people began to notice when you've got a desk full of empty cough medicine bottles and you've just taken half a tab of acid to get through English. People will notice, and I got expelled from school. I got kicked out of school, which I thought, at the time, I thought was great because I could get a job. But then I just realised it wasn't that great and got very, very depressed.
And you experimented, well, if you experiment, you took quite a lot of LSD in those days.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. How old were you when you started to
seriously? When did you have your first trip? I'd probably be about, Hawkwind was 13, I didn't hang about 14. I was smoking pot and dropping LSD.
And how did that influence your musical tastes, do you think, or your musical direction? Or were you already in that?
I was kind of there already, really. It was all part of the same thing. Yeah. I was listening to a lot of the Velvet Underground, MC5, Iggy and the Stooges, and a lot of German music. Faust, Neu, Can, Amundu. I loved all that stuff. I loved it.
Why? I mean, seeing as we're in Germany, we should, I mean, I had a very similar musical journey, inspirational journey to you. And why do you think there was so much interesting music coming out of Germany at that time?
I liked the idea that the music coming out of Germany, this is how it seemed to me in England, was that the bands were trying to do something different, something that wasn't influenced by the West, that it wasn't American, it wasn't the blues. They were trying to create something entirely new, which I thought was a good thing.
And they were all quite different, actually, weren't they?
They were all different, yeah, and that was interesting as well.
You had on one side you had like Armandul, and then on the other extreme you had Kraftwerk.
Yeah,
and of course electronic music played a big part of that, or electronics in that music.
Yeah, and very very primitive electronics to begin with. It was Kraftwerk and trying to think, getting a cluster L, and they were kind of the first electronic bands that interested me.
And as far as drummers are concerned, I know you were very big fan, or very influenced by Jackie Liebertzeit.
Yeah, Jackie
from Cannes.
Jackie from Cannes. There was the two. The two big influences on me were Jackie from Cannes and Klaus from Neu, and they were both people who I wanted to play like, because they were hypnotic. Just listening to the drums alone took you somewhere. It was, you were drawn in, and Jackie's drumming, even though it was very simple, is very complicated, and it kind of evolves and moves, and it's just totally brilliant. It's absolutely amazing.
We share a favourite. Well, one of our favourite tracks is "Oh Yeah."
Oh yeah, that's Oh Yeah always went well, because I for some reason, which I still can't, I can only put down to psychedelic drugs, that I took to listening to music in a field in the middle of the night, surrounded by cows, which is quite dangerous because there's cow pats all over the place. Oh Yeah was a midnight field favourite.
Yeah.
The cows just didn't get it.
They didn't get it?
They didn't get it, no.
They weren't the cows from the Ummagumma,
No, they weren't. They were just stubborn, very bovine. They weren't going to do it. They had no interest in German music.
But you eventually got some gigs with a few bands playing music that you weren't particularly into.
No. What happened was, there's another rule of rock and roll that that drummers will like each other, and I discovered this by going out with the drinking in the pub, and someone said, "Oh yeah, you'd like Phil? He's a drummer." As what's that going to mean? You've got something in common. But it turned out that I did like Phil. He was very good. But he played drums completely different to me. He played drums in what I would call a professional way, whereas I didn't. And but he thought I was really good. He thought I was really good. He couldn't play like me, and I couldn't play like him. And we sort of had this bit of respect. But the thing was, because he was a professional drummer, he was always in demand. He could do like variety shows, musical theatre, anything he could do, and people always wanted him. And what happened was, he would ring me up and say, Steve, I've got myself double booked, which meant two people wanting to play the same night. And he said, "Would you do it?" And I'd never played a gig ever, but that wasn't to put me off. I just said, "Yeah, of course I can do it. Yeah, of course I can do it." And so I ended up playing at a pub in a small town called Leek on a Saturday evening, where we played. There were two gentlemen called Doug and Dave. One was a pianist, the other played the double bass. And the first thing they said to me when I turned up was, "Have you got a dicky bow?" Which is, one of the little bow ties. And I hadn't. But he said, "Not to worry," and pulled one out of his pocket. And the evening trying to tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree and steer it in a kind of can-like direction wasn't pleasing to the diners. They were, no, they weren't happy, and I never got invited back. That was it. That was the end. But it didn't put Phil off, because every time he got double, but he'd still, and it was just, I'd turn up there, no. Come back when you've had a few more lessons. So, it didn't stop me. I carried on doing it, but I gradually realised that it was going to take a bit more than just me turning up and playing the drum riff to impress people.
So around that time, I don't know exactly what that was, but around that time, the Sex Pistols played a legendary gig in Manchester.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Where everybody apparently was, every single musician and budding entrepreneur.
Everybody was there. Yeah. Everybody, apparently. Yeah. I don't believe it for 1 second. I wasn't there. So I can't say for any certainty, but it seems there were far too many people at that gig to have actually fitted in the tiny hall that it was. But the thing about it is, whether they were there or not, everybody started a band.
And you were listening to a lot of, up to that point, you were listening to a lot of experimental psychedelic music.
Yeah.
And then this thing came along.
Yeah.
Called punk rock.
Yeah.
Where did you first hear it, and how did you feel about it when you? Had you read about it first?
You read about it first. I mean, the soul. It was the music papers were everything. That was where you heard about it, and you could kind of see it coming from about 1975. I mean, I'm not a great believer in like the epiphany of the Sex Pistols. I mean, they were kind of a culmination of something. It was. I think in the book I went to Reading Festival in 1975, and you could see the beginning of this thing, and it came out like pub rock was what the thing that started, which was just it was Dr. Feelgood were kind of like the prime exponents of it, and it was all about. I mean, they did rock and roll. But it was all about very high energy rock and roll, and I like that, but the no frills, no nonsense thing, and like pub rock somehow turned into punk rock. I mean, I'd known the term punk rock for years, because that's what we used to call what Iggy did and what the MC5 did. I mean, that was punk rock to me. And then just when they were going over that punk rock, I just thought, oh, these are bands that are kind of playing the same sort of stuff.
It was a kind of a year zero, wasn't it?
It was a year zero, yeah.
Everything changed in music from that moment, really.
It was, but the thing was, it was more than music. Well, you were there.
Yeah.
It was like someone opened a door to a load of possibilities. It wasn't just music, because like musical fans come and go, and some are great and some aren't. But the thing about the punk rock, and anyway, with at that particular time, it was kind of anything is possible. Anything. If you want to start a record label, start a record label. You want to make a film, make a film. And it was as though it was kind of weird. You'd always been able to do it, but it kind of gave you permission. It was all right. You could do stuff like this, and it suddenly clicked. Yeah, I can do it.
And in a certain way, punk separated from punk rock.
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
punk rock kind of got stuck in a particular.
Yeah, it just stayed the same and never moved on.
Yeah, but the punk ethic, or whatever you call it, which was the you can do anything ethic, do it yourself, you can do it, and somebody will watch, somebody will listen, and it will be good or it won't be good, but it didn't really matter.
It didn't matter. It was just, and it was, you could say something, you could express yourself. It didn't have to be brilliant. It didn't have to be fantastic. Anybody could do it. Anybody could make a record. And why that we hadn't thought of it before, I don't know. But it was, for me, it was that thing.
I think because, I mean, my memory of that time, just before the punk revolution, or whatever you want to call it, was major labels, and people who could play very complicated, very well and very complicated, extended sort of pseudo-classical kind of things, which were so far away from what I could do or wanted to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, and punk said, fuck that, you can do it, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. It was particularly, I was into Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa, and they had that same sort of level of virtuosity, and it kind of, I went off it a bit. I mean, I never got into Yes or people like that. I could never understand Yes or why you would want to be able to play like that.
It was showing off, really, wasn't it?
It was showing off, and that's the one aspect of drumming that I can't abide. That there is a whole school of drumming that is basically showing off, you know, and it's great. It's really good. It should be in the Olympics, really, because it's got very little relevance to music, but an awful lot to being very skillful at juggling.
And athletics as well.
And athletics. It has its place, but not in music.
Yeah. So all these bands were forming.
Yeah.
At punk. What were you doing?
To be honest, I kind of, until punk happened, I'd almost thought, oh, this is it, you know, I'm just going to sit here in an office trying to do nothing, just daydreaming my life away. And when punk happened, I kind of, you know, I could see the possibilities. And I went to a gig at a free trade hall, because I still went to a lot of gigs, and I saw Television and Blondie, which was the other thing about punk, because I mean Television and Blondie were two completely different groups. And the other thing about the 70s is you'd mix bands up who really by rights had no right being together, but it was okay. It was okay. You could go and see it. I'm going to see Lou Reed being supported by Fairport Convention, which makes no sense. What would Lou Reed do? But it was perfectly fine then. Anyway, I'd gone to see Television and Blondie, and there was a guy selling a fanzine in the foyer, and at the back there was 3 adverts that the musicians wanted, and it was drummer wanted. 3 bands. There was a band called V2. Some of I've been at school with some of them. Another band called The Fall, and this other band called Warsaw. So it's kind of like being a drummer is kind of, I'm in demand. You know, they obviously don't care. So I just logged it in my head, and then a couple of weeks later, I was walking past the music shop, and purely by chance I looked in the window, and there was an advert, and it said drummer wanted for local band Warsaw, and it was like Warsaw. I remembered the name from the magazine, but it was local, because that was the thing that swung it for me, because I thought, well, I won't have to go very far to be told that I'm no good. So I could go and I'd come home. And anyway, it just said, phone this number, Ian. And I rang it up, and he said, just come out to my house for tea. Which I thought was very weird, because he was the same age as me and he got his own house. I was like, weird, you know. And then it turned out he'd been at school with me, and we'd been to gigs, the same gigs, and he'd been a year above me, and we'd never met, and we liked all the same sort of music, and we must have like walked past each other hundreds of times. And as far as I was concerned, I was the only lad in that school who liked the Velvet Underground, and to find that I wasn't kind of was it was a relief, and it was also a bit of a shock. But anyway, I ended up going to rehearsal with them, which I thought was just going to be thanks but no thanks. But we just started playing. I met the guitarist Bernard, the bass player Peter, and we just started playing, and it just worked. You know, nobody said you're great.
So they asked you back?
No, I've never been asked back. I've never been sacked, and I've never been told I've got the job either. I just keep turning up at all these gigs. You know, it's just I hope they've not got another drummer tonight. Yeah, it's just how it worked. But we just kind of clicked as a band. We kind of learned how to be a band together.
And you started to gig as a band, yeah?
Yeah.
And as Warsaw.
Yeah. We were called Warsaw off Low, Bowie's Low album. And you know, we were kind of, it was all about making music that made you feel a certain way, made you feel the way you felt when you listened to the Stooges. It was all about energy, getting the energy out.
But you changed the name. Why was that?
I'm glad you asked me that, Daniel. Well, what happens? Well, another thing is we didn't have a manager. Well, everybody tried managing us, and basically managing involved access to a telephone and having a hello, I'm ringing up on behalf of a band called, and I just rang people up. You know, give us a gig, and Ian did the same thing, and I rang up. I think it was a lady who did some bookings at the Marquee, and I said, I'm managing a new wave band called Warsaw, and we're very interested in playing London. And they said, oh dear love, sorry, you'll never get a gig in London with a name like Warsaw. There's this other band in London called the Warsaw Pact, and they're going to be huge. So, you know, if you want a gig in London, you're going to have to change your name. Which naturally annoyed everybody, but there's one of his scruples out of the window. Right, we'll change our name then. We'll do anything to get a gig in London. Which we did. I mean, it was annoying, but we changed our name because.
But you had a following, a local following as Warsaw, did you?
Yeah. When you say following, it was kind of like a mobile fight, a never-ending scrap that would turn up at our gigs and roll about in front of the stage, walloping each other. Our friends, we'll call them. We were doing well, there's 20 of them, double figures.
And you recorded as Warsaw as well, didn't you?
We did, yeah. We went to the studio and we did the first EP, An Ideal for Living, as Warsaw, and it was kind of that it was while we were doing that we decided we'd change our name to Joy Division.
Joy Division.
That's what we changed our name to.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
How did that name come about?
Kind
of unusual name.
It's a very unusual name. It came about through the other kind of literature which people read in the 70s was anything with a kind of salacious cover. And that particular book was it was called House of Dolls. It was about life in German concentration camps, which Ian and Bernard had read. They also read lots of other things. Ian did read science fiction as well, I have to say. Bernard lent him the book. It was his book, not his. And he said, that's a good name. I was like, are you sure? And I said, yeah, it's a good name. And I was, the thing about Joy Division and Warsaw is we were a democracy, and it was who thinks it's a good name, right? Okay.
Yeah. And how did people respond to it when they first?
In Macclesfield.
In Macclesfield,
they thought it was a shit name.
Yeah.
What sorts of names? How about the Joy Division? Or that's not a name for a band. That's not a name for a band at all. Slade, that's a name for a band. No, it didn't go down well at all. But I mean, the thing is that eventually, whatever you call yourself, it takes on another meaning.
Yeah, the meaning goes away. It's just
the meaning that you attach to it goes away, and it becomes something else.
Yeah. And by that time, you had a manager who became your long-term manager by then, or?
Yeah, Rob Gretton came to see us when we were Warsaw, and he thought we were absolutely fantastic. He would just turn up and say, "You're fantastic, I want to manage you." And it's like, "Oh God, we've got a right nutcase here." He wants to manage us. And eventually he got Bernard cornered in the phone box in Manchester while he was on the phone to me. He said, "That bloody nutter Rob from the DJ, he's here again, he wants to be our manager, what should I say?" And he just turned up at rehearsal one day and he said, "I'm your manager. You're a right bunch of idiots." And he became the designated adult, which he wasn't really, but he really believed in us, and that helps a lot.
And he kind of guided the way you presented yourselves as well, didn't he?
He tried.
We tried.
He tried, yeah. Because, Ian, that's another thing about being in a band, the style, how you look. Ian was pretty good at looking. He was a bit into fashion. Bernard, who played the guitar, quite smart. Okie, the bass player, not so much. Myself, the drummer, forget it. Yeah, I had absolutely no sense of style at all. My style was geography, drug-addled geography teacher. And I thought that was quite cool. And I thought, fucking hell, thank God nobody can see you behind the drums. No, I was a lost cause in trying to look smart. But Ian looked good.
And somehow you managed to come across Tony Wilson.
Yeah.
Who was a TV presenter at the time.
Tony, everybody knew Tony because he was on television in the area all the time. He was a smart aleck on the TV. He was the face, the young person. He wasn't that young really, but the setting that was
He was younger.
He was younger than the old people, obviously. And he was, he got the arts gig on What's On, and eventually he got his own programme called So It Goes, which he had the Pistols on, and you could never really decide whether he was all right or not, because there was something about him that you really liked, and there was another thing that you weren't too sure about, and that was just how he was. I think one of the things about Tony was he had this thing where he quite liked annoying people, but he was on his own secretly wanting to do a record label. And he saw us as Joy Division at the Stiff Chiswick contest, which which was kind of like Britain's not particularly got much talent, and he liked us, and he wanted to do a record. Everybody wanted to start a record label, and he wanted to do one. He'd been hanging about with Tosh Ryan, who ran Rabid Records, who'd had hits with John Cooper Clarke, and they'd helped Buzzcock start New Hormones, and so that there was this kind of Manchester indie label thing going up, and Tony fancied himself, I think, as an impresario, and what the record was going to be, he didn't know. There were lots of ideas about what it should be, and it ended up being a double single compilation thing, and we were one of the bands that were on it. It could easily have been big in Japan, or it could have been anywhere, but it ended up being us. And it kind of, Joy Division took off from there, because we then had that relationship with Tony Wilson, and he was very, you think about Tony, he was whatever he had. When you met him, it was infectious. He had enthusiasm, and he was very good at putting people together and putting people in situations that they wouldn't go in themselves. Like he put us in the studio with Martin Hannett. He was the only producer really in Manchester. He put us with him, and it all kind of worked. There's a lot of serendipity in this.
And Martin Hannett was also a very important part of getting your recorded sound together, I guess.
Martin definitely was. Martin, you see, there's all these people who coalesced around us, and they were all very, very brilliant people. Tony was a brilliant person. Martin was a brilliant person, and they all had ideas. And Martin had this idea for a sound, and we didn't know what it was. but I like Martin because he was kind of like something out of a science fiction film. Like a science fiction film.
I mean, as a band, a lot of bands have a very fixed idea of what their sound is.
Yeah.
But he had a different idea.
Yes, he did.
And how did that work? What was the dynamic between your vision of the sound that you wanted to get and his vision of the sound that he thought you should have?
Initially, on the EP, the first EP, the Factory Sampler, it was okay because he made it sound like a record. And there were kind of a couple of tracks that really suited that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That they were kind of unfinished, and Martin finished them off.
Yeah.
And that was great. When we went in to do the album later, we had an idea of how we should sound, and Martin made us sound completely different. Martin made the record sound like it was somewhere else. He made it sound like it was a band on another planet, and we didn't like that. It's a long story. I spent a lot of time doing the drums with Martin, so I can't really complain. But hearing the record as a whole, everybody thought, "Oh God, what's he done?" But fortunately, there was no money left to do anything about it.
Because you didn't really like the record or the band.
No, we were shocked. We were shocked about, with how weird it sounded and how unlike us it sounded. And as I say, luckily, there wasn't enough money to remix it. Otherwise, the record that as Unknown Pleasures would have sounded completely different. As it is, every time you listen to it, I hear things that I'd completely forgotten about. It's kind of got a lot of depth to it as a record, and if it had been up to us, it would have just got, and it wouldn't have much depth.
And that, of course, was hugely successful.
Fantastically successful.
And took you all around the UK, Europe.
It took us all around the UK, and it took us to. It took It took us as far as Berlin. That was it. Yeah, we didn't. I mean, the thing about Joy Division, it was a very short period of time, and we didn't really play very many gigs.
Right.
That very what you would call big gigs.
There was an important one though in Brussels, wasn't there?
At the Planquet, yeah.
Which you kind of made you think about how gigs could be rather than just the usual back of a train.
Yeah, I mean that coming to Europe and seeing the places that you could play was very interesting, because we were at the time we were just playing. It was either university halls or these sort of top-ranked bingo halls, and it was all very old-fashioned showbiz thing. And when we came to Europe, you would see like the Planquet was a converted sugar refinery. That it turned into like an arts place, and playing places like that was it was very interesting, because it was the idea of the multimedia thing. Like when we did that gig, there was William Burroughs was on. They were showing a film of performance, and it was it was really, really interesting. It was a totally different way of seeing a band than anything I'd come across before.
And then you had to go back to the top ranks.
Then we had to go back to the top ranks again. Yeah.
And then how it was pretty close. I mean, it was quite. You recorded the second album quite quickly, didn't you? Or quite soon after that?
Well, we just got good. We got really, really good at writing songs. We became really prolific at writing songs, and all the way through the Buzzcocks tour, it was like new songs coming. So Closer came out. We recorded it pretty soon after that.
And that was a real hit, wasn't it? In terms of, I mean, I remember it. It was
Okay, last question.
Oh, God.
Sorry.
Time's flying.
Yeah, time's flying. It was so much fun. Everyone's going. It was, but we hated it.
Yeah, of course.
As musicians do. And unfortunately, Ian had began suffering with epilepsy even after the first record, and his health was kind of like in decline, and that record was, even though I think it's an absolutely fantastic record, the best record we ever did, it ended very badly with Ian taking his own life, and that's Joy Division over.
And there's so many more things I'd like to talk to you about.
Yeah, we've run out now.
We ran out of time, but I mean, one of the things that struck me after Ian's death was the mixture, obviously, of grief, anger, and the absolute desire to continue.
Yeah, all of those things, and we just discovered something that we really, really enjoyed doing it, and something we were all good at, and we had to stop doing it, and it felt like going from. How we became New Order is defined by a load of things that you weren't anymore, and it was a very, very complicated thing to do. Difficult, more than complicated. Difficult,
but it got there.
It got there. Yes, it did. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to stop now, which is a real shame. But what I really recommend the book. It is a fantastic. I mean, you can got a really good flavour of it and the tone of it from Stephen's talk.
We would have some to sell. There are some in Berlin, but who knows where. But they've been delivered. So maybe they'll be here tomorrow. And if you want to come back, maybe we'll have one there.
It's a really great book, and hopefully part 2 will follow.
Yeah, hopefully it's written and it should be out middle of next year.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Wow, that's a big word.